wind in Wyoming in 1875 held no sympathy. It was a raw, scouring force that blew across the high plains, carrying the grit of 1,000 miles. It turned the grass to a brittle, uniform gray and pushed the dust into the eyes and mouths of anyone foolish enough to face it. The sky was a thin, pale blue, vast and empty, offering no promise of warmth. Winter was not just coming. It was already here, laying claim to the land. Jessie Keller kept her head down, leaning into the gusts. One hand, raw and red, held the reins of the tired gelding. The other clutched the collar of a coat grown too thin for this country. She was 22 years old, but she felt ancient. The girl she had been in St. Louis seemed a stranger, someone from a different life, a life before the fear. Now, there were hollows beneath her eyes and a tightness in her jaw that did not yield. The wind snagged the edge of her shawl. It was wool, once fine, but a long, jagged tear ran near the hem where it had caught on a fence post 3 days ago. She pulled it tighter, the rough fibers scratching her chin. The shawl was her last link to her mother, the last soft thing she owned. She had been riding toward the sunset, using it as a desperate compass, until it disappeared behind the bruised clouds on the horizon. Now, there was only the gray light of dusk and the gate. It loomed out of the prairie, built of heavy timbers that looked as rooted as the hills, strong, unforgiving. Burned deep into the high crossbeam was the brand, a single, sharp diamond, with a Y set beneath it. The Diamond Y. This was the place, the last chance. The liveryman in Creekside, a town a hard half-day ride back, had pointed her this way. "Brody Yates runs it now," the man had said, spitting tobacco. "Since his PA passed, he might need help. He's a square man." Jessie's stomach cramped. A familiar, hollow ache. Hunger was a constant companion, but the fear that rode behind her, the fear that had pushed her west, was sharper. It had a name: Gavin Doyle. She had to stop. She could not spend another night on the open plain, starting at every coyote's cry, imagining it was his footstep. She needed shelter. She needed a place where she could trade her labor for safety. She knew how to work. Her hands were chapped, but they were capable. She could cook, anything from salt pork to sourdough. She could sew a seam straight and strong. She could clean a house until it shone. She could even manage a horse. Mostly, her skills were domestic, learned in a house on the edge of St. Louis. But she had spent hours at the stables nearby, watching the grooms, learning the quiet language of the horses. She learned quickly. Survival demanded it. She halted the gelding at the entrance. The gate itself was a test. To pass through it was to declare herself, to become visible. Here, on the frayed edge of civilization, the rules were fluid. Wyoming was not Missouri. The law was thin, stretched between isolated towns. A man's honor, or a woman's reputation, was defined by the whispers of the community, the judgment of the church congregation, and the final word of the county judge. A rumor was a second sentence. It was a brand of its own, and it could destroy a person as thoroughly as any bullet. She knew what they would say. A lone woman, young, arriving at dusk at a ranch run by a lone man. She was risking the very dignity she was trying to protect. But the alternative was the road, and the road belonged to Gavin. She squeezed her eyes shut, just for a moment, the wind tearing at her hair. She saw him, her stepfather, his face, handsome in a way that had turned sour, flushed with whiskey and the heat of the cards. His voice, coated in charm until the charm broke, revealing the violence beneath. He was tracking her. She knew it. He wanted the inheritance papers her mother had hidden, the small legacy that was Jessie's only path to independence, to Gavin. It was just the next stake for his game. That pressure, that shadow falling long and cold across the plains, was more terrifying than any rumor. She nudged the weary horse, and the animal walked gratefully through the open gate. The ranch yard was orderly, but profoundly still. It smelled of cold iron, pine smoke, and the deep, warm scent of hay and manure from the barn. Smoke rose in a straight, thin line from the chimney of the main house, a solid 2-story timber structure. More smoke came from the bunkhouse, set a respectful distance away. It was the hour for supper. A man emerged from the barn, carrying a bridle. He did not hurry. He moved with the measured economy of a man who owned the ground he walked on, a man whose work was never finished. He stopped dead when he saw her, a shadow materializing in his yard. It had to be him, Brody Yates. The liveryman had said he was 30. He looked it. He was tall, and his shoulders were broad beneath a canvas work coat worn pale at the elbows. He wore the ranch, the responsibility of it, like a second skin. The town talk was that he had buried his father just 2 months back, the full weight of the Diamond Y, its cattle, its land, and its debts, now rested on him. Jessie dismounted. Her knees nearly buckled. The long ride and the cold had settled deep in her bones. She stood by her horse, stroking its neck, letting the animal's simple presence steady her. She would not walk to the house. She would wait. Brody Yates approached, his boot heels making no sound in the thick dust. He stopped 10 feet from her. His gaze was not unkind, but it was thorough. He looked at her exhausted horse, at her torn shawl, at the city cut of her worn boots. He looked, finally, at her face. His eyes were the color of the cured grass, gray, steady, and revealing nothing. Jessie met his gaze. She would not be the first to look away. She was 22, and she had survived. That was her armor. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was low, with a rough edge, as if he had not used it much that day. "Sir," she replied. Her own voice was thin, stolen by the wind. The silence stretched out, filled only by the high, lonely whistle of the wind passing through the corral poles. Brody looked at this woman. She was thin, almost bird-like, yet she stood straight. There was a quality to her, a fineness in the line of her jaw and the set of her head, that her ragged clothes could not hide. He had to consolidate the ranch. His father's death had left gaps, not just in the ledgers, but in the rhythm of the place. The house was cold. It was just a building now. The ranch hands were good men, loyal to his father and, for now, to him. But they lived in the bunkhouse. The main house, his house, had lost its heart. It no longer smelled of baking bread or hot coffee. It was silent. He needed help, but he did not need another rough hand to crowd the bunkhouse. He needed to restore the home. This woman, however, was a complication. Creekside was only a half-day ride. By noon tomorrow, the gossip would be thick as axle grease. The Hendersons at the Mercantile, the women at the church circle, they would all be talking. A young woman, alone, at the Diamond Y. He was a man who valued his name. He valued honor. He believed in partnerships, not servitude. He did not want a servant, cowering in the kitchen. He was not even sure what he wanted, but he knew this woman was a risk. Jessie saw the calculation in his eyes. She had seen it before. She was a problem to be solved, a risk to be managed, a burden. "I am looking for work," she said, her voice stronger this time, pushing past the tightness in her throat. "I am not looking for charity." She had to survive. She had to find safety. But she would not beg. She would not sacrifice the one piece of herself that Gavin Doyle had not managed to break. Her dignity. The wind howled. A sudden, violent gust that tore the shawl from her grip. It flapped wildly. A wounded bird. She lunged for it, catching the torn fringe just before it flew away. She clutched it to her chest. Brody Yates watched her small, desperate movement. He watched her hand, white-knuckled, clutching the ruined wool. He looked at the gate she had ridden through, the boundary between the wild prairie and the fragile order of his ranch. The dust swirled around her feet, a harsh, unforgiving test. And she was still standing. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was not acceptance, it was acknowledgement. Brody Yates held his ground, the bridle still heavy in his hand. The dust from the barn floor was ground into his palms, the smell of hay and warm horse a familiar comfort. This woman was not, she was a disruption, a piece of the outside world he had not invited in. "I need work," Jessie Keller said again, her voice clearer now, though it still wavered. "And a place to stay." She saw his gaze drop to her horse. The animal's head was low, its ribs visible even in the fading light. "Your horse is spent," Brody said. It was a statement of fact, not an accusation. "As am I," Jessie admitted. The admission cost her. "But I am not asking for a handout. Mr. Yates, I came here to earn my keep." "Earn it, how? This is a cattle ranch. Ma'am, the work is hard." His eyes swept over her thin frame. She looked as if a strong gust could carry her off. Jessie straightened her spine. The movement was slight, but it was defiant. "I can cook," she said, her words precise, as if reciting a list she had memorized. "I can cook for your men. I can clean your house. I can mend clothes. And I am not afraid of lye soap or boiling water. I can manage a garden. Come spring." She paused, then added, "I will accept whatever wage you think is fair, or no wage at all. Just a meal and a dry place to sleep." Her voice, that was what held him. It was not the voice of a drifter. Despite the dust and the fear, it held a trace of education, a careful way of forming words that spoke of parlors in St. Louis, not bunkhouses. It clashed with the torn shawl and the gaunt look in her eyes. This woman had fallen, and fallen hard. Jessie watched him, trying to read the impassive face. The land around her was vast and empty, but this ranch, this yard, was a fortress of order. The tools by the barn door were not left to rust. They were hung in their proper places. The wood pile was neatly stacked. The corral fences were strong, not one rail sagging. This was a place run by a man who believed in discipline. It was a place where things were done right. It gave her a small, sharp sliver of hope. A man who cared for his tools might be a man who was fair to his people. But his silence was unnerving. "I do not keep servants," Brody said at last. The words were flat. Jessie's hope faltered. She flinched, as if he had struck her. I am not. She did not know what to say. She was offering the only thing she had left her ability to serve. If he rejected that, there was nothing else. A cold, hard knot of value and pride settled between them. To Brody, the word servant tasted wrong. It implied a master, a hierarchy he had come to dislike under his own father's roof. He had seen the way hired girls were treated, disposable, invisible. He did not want that in his house. He did not want a cringing shadow in his kitchen. To Jessie, servant was a step up. It was a job. It was a roof. It was safety. It was 1,000 times better than what Gavin Doyle had intended for her. A life of servitude with no wages at all, bound by shame and fear. She was asking for a foothold, and this man was arguing about the name of it. "I just need a chance, sir," she whispered. The light was failing. The blue of the sky had deepened to a cold, bruised purple. The wind had a new edge, a promise of frost that would settle deep into the ground by morning. From far off, over the darkening plains, came a sound, a long, thin howl, a coyote, or perhaps a wolf. The sound slid under Jessie's skin. It was the voice of the wilderness, a reminder of what waited for her if she was turned away. To be out there, alone, with no fire. Her gelding shivered, a violent rattling shudder. Brody saw it. He saw the woman's hand go to the horse's neck, a gesture of automatic comfort. He was a man of the ranch. He could not turn away a suffering animal. And the woman, it seemed, was part of the same desperate equation. The social risk was plain. He could already hear the talk in Creekside. Brody Yates has a woman up at the Diamond Y. Pretty thing, they say, showed up alone. It would stain his name, and it would destroy hers. It was a careless, foolish thing to do. But the alternative? Sending her back out into that cold, dark night felt like a different kind of dishonor. It felt like cruelty. "The men need supper," he said abruptly. Jesse's head snapped up. "The house is my father's housekeeper. Martha, she comes in from town twice a week. It is not her day. The kitchen is yours, if you want to prove what you said." It was not a yes. It was a test, a trial. "Yes," she said, relief flooding her so fast it made her dizzy. "Yes, I can. Thank you." "Do not thank me yet," he cautioned. "It is a trial supper. We will talk in the morning." He pointed to the barn. "There is a clean loft over the tack room. It is dry. You can put your horse in the empty stall next to my mare. There is feed." A loft, not the house. Jessie's relief cooled, but she understood. It was a barn. It was also a boundary. He was offering her shelter, but not welcome. Not yet. It was a place for a hired hand, not a guest. It was respectable. He was protecting himself, and, in a strange way, he was protecting her, too. "That is kind," she said, her voice steady. "It is practical," he corrected her. He turned toward the house. "I will light the lamp in the kitchen. The stove is cold." He walked away, his stride long, leaving her to follow. Jessie let out a breath she had not known she was holding. Her legs felt like water. She led the gelding toward the massive barn. The smell of sweet hay and leather washed over her, a scent of safety and honest work. She settled the horse, her hands clumsy with cold as she unfastened the cinch. She measured out a small portion of oats, her own hunger a sharp pang as she watched the horse eat. She found the ladder to the loft. It was dark, but he was right. It was dry, and it smelled of clean hay and cedar. It was a palace. She left her meager saddlebags there and climbed back down. She took a moment, leaning against the rough wood of the stall, to gather herself. She was safe. For one night. She stepped back out into the yard. The house was 30 yards away. A single, warm yellow light now glowed in a downstairs window. The kitchen. As she started to walk toward it, a movement on the horizon caught her eye. She froze. On the ridge to the east, the one she had ridden over hours ago, a figure sat on horseback. It was too far to see a face, just a dark silhouette against the last band of dying light. A man. He was perfectly still, watching the ranch, watching her. Jessie's heart stopped, then kicked against her ribs with a sick, heavy beat. The wind felt 100 times colder. It could be anyone, a traveler, another hand looking for work, a hunter. But her fear gave it a face. It was Gavin. He had found her. He knew where she was. The figure on the hill did not move for a long, terrible minute. Then, slowly, he turned his horse. Not back the way he had come, but north, disappearing over the curve of the earth. He was gone, but he had been there. The threat was no longer a shadow in her mind. It was real, and it was close. Jessie wrapped her arms around herself, the torn shawl a flimsy defense. She looked at the light in the kitchen. It was a small, fragile beacon in a vast, dangerous dark. She had one night. She would have to make it count. She put her head down and walked toward the house, to cook for her supper and for her life. Jessie Keller was awake before the first hint of gray light touched the loft's dusty window. Sleep had been shallow, a nervous truce between exhaustion and fear. The figure on the ridge had haunted her rest, but the loft was warm. Or at least, it was not cold. The heat from the animals below, the mare, her own tired gelding, rose with the scent of hay and offered a strange, animal comfort. She rose in the dark, her joints stiff. She moved quietly down the ladder, checked her horse, and then slipped out into the yard. The air was sharp, still. It bit at her cheeks. The light in the ranch house kitchen was not yet lit. She found the door unlocked, as he had left it. She stepped inside. The silence was heavy. The kitchen filled with the cold. dead smell of an unused room. She found matches and a coal oil lamp. The yellow light pushed back the shadows, revealing a clean but stark space. Worn countertops, iron pots hanging from hooks, a massive black stove. She set to work. She found the bin of flour, the salt, the lard. She did not find a sourdough starter, but she found baking soda and buttermilk. Close enough. Her hands, stiff and red, moved with practiced efficiency. She built a fire in the stove, her movements quick, feeding it kindling until the iron began to snap and ping with warmth. She mixed the dough for biscuits, her touch light. She found a side of salt pork hanging in the pantry, slicing it thick and laying it in a heavy skillet. Soon, the kitchen was filled with the sounds of a house waking up, the sharp sizzle of the pork, the hiss of the fire, the rich, earthy smell of coffee boiling in the pot. The house was coming alive around her. She felt a sense of purpose, a shield against the fear of the night. This, she understood, the work. Just as the sun broke the horizon, casting long, thin shadows across the yard, she heard heavy boots on the porch. The door opened. 3 men filed in, followed by Brody Yates. They were ranch hands, stamped by the wind and the sun. Their faces were leathered, their eyes watchful. They did not look at her directly, but they looked at the stove, at the platter of biscuits, at the pot of coffee. They took off their hats, hung them on pegs by the door, and sat at the long wooden table. Jessie moved wordlessly. She poured coffee, black and strong, into tin mugs. She set the platter of biscuits, golden brown and risen high, on the table. She followed it with a skillet of salt pork and a bowl of gravy she had made from the drippings. The men ate. They did not talk. The only sounds were the scrape of forks on tin plates and the low murmur of "more coffee" or "pass the meat." Jessie stood by the stove, her hands clasped, watching. She watched them eat every biscuit. She watched the oldest of the 3, a man with a face like a dried apple, nod to himself as he finished his second plate. They were hungry men, but this was more than hunger. It was approval, silent and absolute. One by one, they finished. They stood, put on their hats, and nodded once toward Brody Yates. "Boss," they said, and filed back out into the morning. The silence that returned was different. It was warmer. Brody Yates had not eaten much. He had nursed 1 cup of coffee. Watching her, he sat at the head of the table, the owner of the room, the owner of the silence. Jessie began to clear the plates, moving them to the wash basin. The tension returned, tightening her shoulders. The trial was over. Now came the judgment. She scrubbed the plates, her back to him. She could feel his gaze on her. "Mandy," he said. Jessie stopped. "Pardon. The woman who cooked here before, last year, she made biscuits. They were like rocks." He said it simply. "Yours are not." She turned, drying her hands on a scrap of toweling. "Thank you, Mr. Yates." He was quiet for another long moment. He looked at her hands, red from the hot water. Then at her face. "You come from St. Louis," he stated. It was not a question. "Yes." "It is a long way to ride for a cooking job. A woman alone." Jessie's throat tightened. The shadow of Gavin Doyle fell across the warm kitchen. I needed a change. My family situation." She let her voice trail off. She would not lie, but she could not tell the truth. The truth was a weapon, and she did not know if this man was a friend or simply an employer. "You have a fine way of speaking," he observed, his eyes steady. "You move quiet, like you are used to better rooms than this one." "I am used to whatever room I am in, sir," she replied, her voice stiffening. "But you are running," he said, not unkindly. "It is all over you. You are running from something." Jessie flinched. She looked away, toward the window. The vast, empty prairie offered no escape. I am looking for work. I am offering an honest day's labor for an honest wage. My past. It has no bearing on how I cook or how I clean. It has bearing on me, he said, his voice flat. This is my ranch. I do not bring trouble here, Miss Keller. I am not trouble, she said, her voice low. I am just trying to survive. She faced him, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. The moment was here. She had to ask, Mr. Yates, I have shown I can do the work. I am asking for the position. Her voice, which had been so clear, trembled on the last word. Brody Yates looked at her, this wisp of a woman with terror in her eyes and steel in her spine. He looked around the kitchen. It already felt different. It smelled like a home. He thought of the silence, the dust, the 2 long months since his father's death. He had been trying to run this ranch, the cattle, the books, and he had been failing to hold the house together. He made his decision. Miss Keller, he began, his voice slow, measured. I will be plain. I am not looking to hire a housekeeper. Jessie's heart sank. It was over. She had failed. She had nowhere else to go. She nodded, her face pale, bracing herself for the order to leave. My father, Brody continued, standing up and walking to the stove. He kept servants. He liked the order of it. He liked people knowing their place. I do not like the word, and I do not like what it means. He turned to her. He was a tall man, and the small kitchen seemed to shrink around him. I watched you this morning. You did not just make breakfast. You took command of this kitchen. You worked as if you owned it. You have pride. I do not want to hire a servant. Miss Keller, I do not want someone who cringes. Jessie was confused, afraid. I do not understand. If you are not hiring, I will take my horse and be on my way. I did not say I was not hiring, Brody said. He looked her square in the eye, his gaze intense. I need a wife. The words hit Jessie like a slap. A cold, sick wave of humiliation washed over her. It was always this. She was not a cook. She was a commodity, a woman to be taken, used, owned. This was no different from Gavin. It was just a different kind of cage. She recoiled, taking a step back, her face, which had been pale with fear, now flushed with anger. Sir, she said, her voice shaking with a different emotion. I am not for sale. I am not. I did not come here to be. I will not. Brody saw her reaction, the fire that leaped into her eyes, and he realized immediately how she had heard his words. He raised a hand, not to touch her, but to stop her. No, he said, his voice sharp. You misunderstand me. Completely. He took a step back himself, giving her space. I spoke badly. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Listen to me, please. When I say wife, I am not asking you to my bed. I am talking about a partner. Jessie stared at him, suspicious, her defenses high. In Wyoming, he said, his voice softer now, trying to explain. A ranch is too much for one person. A man runs the outside, the cattle, the fences. He needs a partner to run the inside, the house, the ledgers, the garden, the supplies. Someone who is not a servant taking orders, but a partner making decisions. Someone who has as much stake in this place as he does. He looked at her, willing her to understand. I am offering you a position, a partnership, to build this house back, to make it a home again. Not as a hired girl I can fire on a whim, but as someone who belongs here, someone with honor. Jessie was still, her mind racing. A partner, not a servant. It was a shocking idea. It was more than she had dared to hope for. But the word wife was a brand, a word of ownership. But the name, she whispered. Mr. Yates, the talk, a woman living here. It would stop the gossip, he said simply. That is the other half of it. If you are a hired girl, living in the loft, you are fair game for every rumor in Creekside. They will tear you down. They will tear me down. But a wife is respected. A marriage, even one on paper, is a wall. It is protection. He looked at her, his face earnest. I am not proposing marriage. Miss Keller, not in the way you think. I am proposing an arrangement, a partnership, bound by law, to give us both what we need. You need safety, a home, a place to stand. I need a partner to run this house. I am offering you the protection of my name, and in return, I am asking for your skill, your dignity. He paused. If folks talk, let 'em. But they will be talking about Mistress Yates, not some stray girl. There is a difference. Jessie was silent. Her mind was reeling. He was offering her a shield. He was offering her respect. He was offering her a name. What would be the rules? She asked, her voice small. Clear, he said. You would have this house. It would be your domain. The loft would be yours. As a private space. We would be partners. In the eyes of the town. In the eyes of the law. Nothing more. Unless we both agreed. He added that last part quickly. Your honor would be safe here. I swear that. A trial, Jessie said, her mind grasping for practical terms. I would need a trial. 1 week, he agreed instantly. 1 week. You stay in the loft. You run this house. You see if the bargain feels fair. If at the end of 7 days you want to leave, I will give you a month's wages, a good horse, and you will be on your way. No questions asked. You have the right to withdraw at any time. A week, 7 days of safety, 7 days to think. It was a risk, but it was a calculated one. He was offering her a choice. The shadow of Gavin Doyle passed through her mind. The man on the ridge. I accept the trial. Jessie said. Relief passed over Brody's face. So quickly it was almost invisible. Good, he said. That is good. Later that afternoon, after the midday meal was cleaned and put away, Jessie felt a desperate need for air. A moment outside the confines of the house and the weight of the decision. She told Brody she was going to check on her horse. She walked toward the barn, the cold air clearing her head. The ranch felt different now. It was no longer a place of judgment, but a place of possibility. As she passed the main gate, the one she had entered in desperation, she paused. She thought of the rider on the hill. Had it been her imagination, had the dusk and her fear simply painted a picture of Gavin? She ran a hand over the thick, weathered timber of the main post. It was rough, scarred by wind and time. And then her fingers brushed against something else. She stopped. She looked closer. There, just below the burned Diamond Y brand, was a fresh cut, a sliver of white. New wood exposed to the air. It was small, no bigger than her thumb, but it was deliberate. It was a letter, a capital G. It was not a cattle brand. It was carved with a looping, arrogant flourish she knew as well as she knew her own name. It was the way Gavin Doyle signed his name, the way he marked his gambling slips. He had been here, not on the ridge, but here, at this gate. He had been close enough to touch it. He was not a shadow. He was real. He had seen her. He knew where she was. A cold, sharp terror, colder than any Wyoming wind, pierced her straight through. She looked back at the house, a solid, safe-looking building. She looked at the road, the long, empty road that led back to the wilderness, back to him. Brody Yates was offering her a name, a shield, a wall. Jessie Keller straightened her shoulders. She turned her back on the gate and the road. She had made her choice. She was staying. The trial week passed, and then another. The mark on the gate, the carved G, remained a cold knot of fear in Jessie's stomach. But the work was a powerful antidote. The work was real. Jessie Keller moved through the Diamond Y ranch house, not like a servant, but like a general retaking lost territory. The first 2 days, she had scrubbed. She boiled linens, beat dust from the few rugs, and attacked the kitchen grease with a block of lye soap until her hands were raw. The house had been a clean but soulless place, a shell left behind by a man in grief. Jessie filled it. She woke in the cold dark of her loft, and by the time the first light hit the yard, the kitchen stove was hot, the coffee was boiling, and the smell of baking bread or biscuits had become the ranch's new alarm clock. The hands, Tom, and the 2 younger men, Shorty and Miguel, had stopped looking at her sideways. They now looked at her with a kind of quiet reverence. Their tin plates were filled with savory stews that stretched the salt beef supply, with potato and onion pies, with beans cooked so long and slow with a bit of molasses that they were a meal in themselves. She was thrifty, but she was not mean. The food was good. The house was warm. The Diamond Y, which had been just a workplace, was beginning to feel like a home base. Brody Yates watched it all. He said little, but he saw everything. He saw the way she managed the pantry, making a list of what was needed, her handwriting a fine, clear script that was wasted on lists of flour and beans. He saw the way she mended his work shirts, the stitches so small and neat they were nearly invisible. He saw the way she had taken a bare corner of the kitchen and set up a small station for herself, for the accounts. Their truce, their arrangement, created a new rhythm. They were 2 poles, and the life of the ranch now ran between them. One afternoon, Jessie was in the barn, trying to mend a leather strap on her own worn saddlebag. Her fingers were clumsy with the awl and thick waxed thread. She was trying to copy a stitch she had seen Tom use on a bridle. "You are going to break the needle," Brody said from behind her. She jumped, startled. She had not heard him approach. "I am just trying to fix this." He stepped past her, taking the leather from her hands. His own hands were broad, calloused, but they were surprisingly deft. "You have to pull the thread through at an angle," he said. He did not take over the job. He held the leather, positioned the awl, and then nodded for her to take the needle. "Like that. Pull it tight, not too tight." She did. The stitch held. He showed her again, and she completed the repair. "Where did you learn to ride?" he asked, handing the bag back to her. "At a stable near my home, in St. Louis," she said. I watched the grooms. I did not take proper lessons." "You ride well enough," he said, which from him was high praise. In return, she taught him. He was a man used to giving orders and having them followed. He was not used to a domain that was not his. The kitchen was unequivocally hers. One evening, he came in late from the forge, tracking in mud and smelling of coal smoke. He went straight to the coffee pot. "Wash your hands, Mr. Yates," she said, not looking up from the dough she was kneading. He stopped, mug in hand. The men in the bunkhouse would have laughed. Brody Yates did not take orders. He looked at his hands, black with soot. He looked at her clean floor. He put the mug down and went to the wash basin. When he sat at the table, his hands scrubbed clean. She placed a hot plate of stew in front of him. A new rule had been set and respected. He had given her domain, and he was honoring the line. After 2 weeks, the pantry was running low. "We need supplies," Jessie announced, showing him her list. "We are out of coffee, low on flour, and the men are nearly out of cured tobacco." Brody nodded. "We will ride to Creekside in the morning." Jessie hesitated. Creekside. The word made her stomach clench. The town was where Gavin had been. "You need to be seen," Brody said, his voice quiet, understanding her fear. "The longer we wait, the worse the gossip will be. We will go in, we will buy our supplies, we will introduce you, and we will come home." He was right. Hiding was an admission of guilt. The next morning, she put on her only other dress, a dark wool that she had mended. She brushed her hair until it shone, tying it back in a severe knot. She would look respectable. She would look like she belonged. Brody drove the wagon, and she sat on the hard bench beside him. The half-day ride was cold, the wind sharp, but Brody kept up a steady, impersonal talk about the land, pointing out a hawk, the way the creek cut through the lower pasture, the section of fence Tom was mending. He was giving her facts, anchoring her to this new place, drawing her a map. Creekside was not much, a single dusty street with a dozen buildings on either side, a saloon, a church, a small sheriff's office, and Henderson's Mercantile. Brody pulled the wagon up in front of the Mercantile. "Wait here," he said, and went inside. A moment later, he came out, followed by a stout man in an apron, Mr. Henderson. Mr. Yates, good to see you." The man boomed, "Henderson." Brody nodded. He turned and offered his hand to Jessie. She placed her hand in his, a brief, firm contact. He helped her down from the wagon. Mr. Henderson's eyes, bright and curious, fixed on her. "Mr. Henderson," Brody said, his voice clear and carrying in the quiet street. "I would like you to meet Miss Jessie Keller. She is the new housekeeper out at the Diamond Y." Jessie met the store owner's gaze. "A pleasure, sir." Housekeeper. The word was a shield. It was a lie, but it was a respectable lie. It placed her, defined her, and shut down the most salacious rumors before they could even begin. "Well, welcome, welcome," Henderson said, his curiosity satisfied. "You come at a hard time, Miss Keller. Winter is on us." "I am aware," Jessie said, "which is why my list is rather long." Inside, the store was warm and smelled of cinnamon, new denim, and coffee beans. A woman with graying hair, Mistress Henderson, was behind the counter. The introduction was repeated. Mistress Henderson's smile was a little tighter, her eyes more assessing. As they were gathering their supplies, the door opened, and another woman came in. She was older, in her 50s, with a kind, tired face. "Martha," Brody said, nodding in greeting. Jessie looked at the woman. This was Martha, the part-time housekeeper he had mentioned, the woman whose place she had, in essence, taken. "Brody," the woman said, her voice warm. Her eyes immediately went to Jessie. "Martha, this is Miss Keller," Brody said. Jessie felt the woman's scrutiny. It was not unkind, but it was deep. Martha was looking at the quality of Jessie's dress, the way she held herself, the way Brody stood near her. "A pleasure to meet you, ma'am," Jessie said. Martha smiled, a genuine slow smile. "The house needed a firm hand," she said, her eyes twinkling as she looked at Brody. "This one's father, rest his soul, was a good man, but he would not know a dust rag from a dish rag. And Brody here, he takes after his PA in that." "Martha," Brody grumbled, but his ears turned red. "You keep him in line, Miss Keller," Martha said. "And if you need anything, I'm just at the end of town." She was offering an alliance. Jessie felt a wave of relief. "Thank you, ma'am, I will." They were nearly done when the door opened again. This time it was a tall, older gentleman with a severe face and a white mustache. He wore a string tie and a long black coat. "Judge," Brody said, his voice respectful. "Mr. Yates," the man replied. His eyes glanced at Jessie, sharp and quick, before he moved to the counter to speak with Henderson. Judge Wilson, the law. His presence made the small store feel official, as if a court was in session. Jessie kept her head down, focusing on a bolt of calico. It was then that she heard it. From the back of the store, near the pot-bellied stove, two old prospectors were talking. Their voices were low, rumbling. "I'd never seen a man play cards like that. Cold. Won near $200 over at the saloon last night. The one from back east Doyle. They called him..." Jessie's blood went cold. She froze, her hand still on the calico. "That is him," Flashy sort, asked a lot of questions, odd questions. What kind of questions? Asked about, well, he was asking if any new folks had passed through, specifically, a young woman from St. Louis. Jessie's breath caught in her throat. He was here, not just at the gate, but here, in town, asking for her. The threat was no longer a shadow. It was breathing the same air. She must have made a small sound. Brody was at her side in an instant. He did not look at her. He looked at the two men. His face had gone hard, the planes of his jaw set. "We have what we need," he said, his voice low and tight. He steered her to the counter. They paid. Judge Wilson watched them, his expression unreadable. The ride back to the ranch was silent. The wind had picked up, and the sky was no longer a pale, clear blue. It was darkening to the color of lead. Brody did not speak until they were back in the ranch yard, after they had unloaded the wagon. He followed her into the kitchen. The house was cold and still. "He is here," Jessie said. It was not a question. "Gavin Doyle." "Yes. He will come for me. He will have to come through me." She looked at him, at his steady, serious face. She wanted to believe him. That night, the house was filled with a new, shared tension. The storm was coming, both outside and in, after the hands had eaten and left. Jessie and Brody sat at the long kitchen table, the ledgers open between them, but neither was working. The wind was beginning to howl around the corners of the house. Jessie got up to put the coffee pot on the stove, which she had kept banked high. Brody rose at the same time, to get a mug from the hook. They reached for the pot at the same moment. Her hand brushed his. His skin was rough, warm. Her own was cold. It was a simple touch, an accident, but in the charged silence of the kitchen, it was a shock. They both froze. They were standing close, closer than they had ever been. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. She could smell the scent of him, clean soap and cold wind. She looked up, and his eyes were on her, his gaze intent. For a long second, the world shrank to the small space between them. The wind, the fear, the ledgers. It all faded. There was only this, the silent, stunned awareness of him as a man, and her as a woman. Jessie pulled her hand back as if burned. She stepped away, turning her face toward the stove. I will get the coffee." Brody took a step back. "Too. The spell was broken." He cleared his throat. "Miss Keller." She did not turn. "The men you heard in the store, they are just talk, but the sky is real." She turned then. "What do you mean?" "A storm. A bad one. The cattle are moving to the canyons. They feel it." He looked at the window, where the first few hard ice pellets were beginning to ping against the glass. "Tomorrow, we have to ride. We have to push the rest of the herd into shelter, or we will lose them." He was all business again. The rancher, the boss. "I will have breakfast ready before dawn," she said. "Good." He paused at the door. "But that is not what I meant. We will be riding, all of us, Tom, Shorty, Miguel, and me." He looked at her. "The house will be empty." She understood. She would be here, alone, while Gavin Doyle was in a town a half-day ride away. Fear, cold and sharp, lanced through her. She looked at the kitchen, her safe, warm kitchen. It suddenly felt like a trap. She thought of the loft, of hiding, but Gavin knew how to find people who hid. She lifted her chin. "No." Brody frowned. "No, I will not stay here," Jessie said, her voice shaking, but firm. "I can ride. You said so yourself. I can help. I can watch. I am not afraid of work. I am more afraid of being left behind." She was choosing action. She was choosing to face the storm. Brody looked at her for a long time. He saw the terror in her eyes, warring with a resolve that was as hard as the high plains ground. She was not a cowering servant. She was what he had asked for, a partner. "All right," he said. "Get some sleep. You will ride with me." He started to leave, then stopped, his hand on the door latch. "Jessie!" It was the first time he had used her given name. She looked at him. "You stay with me. You do exactly as I say. With me. You do not have to be afraid." She watched him walk out, his shoulders broad against the dark. She stood in the warm kitchen, the wind screaming outside, and she held on to his words. "With me? You do not have to be afraid." For the first time, Jessie Keller began to believe it might be true. The dawn was not a dawn at all. It was a suffocating gray smear that pressed down on the ranch. The wind had a new voice, a high, continuous shriek that sounded like a locomotive passing just outside the windows. It was no longer a wind that blew. It was a physical wall that pushed. Jessie had the coffee boiling and a pot of thick oatmeal simmering when the men came in. They ate standing, their movements quick, their faces grim. "It is worse than I thought," Brody said, his voice low, directed at Tom, the old hand. "It is a full blizzard." Tom nodded, pulling his hat down. "We will lose the strays in the north pasture if we do not move now. They will drift with the wind until they pile up in the gulch." "All right." Brody turned, his gaze finding Jessie. She was already dressed, wearing every layer of clothing she owned, her thin coat on top, the torn wool shawl wrapped around her neck and face. "Stay with the wagon. It is too much," he said, his words in order. "I can ride," she said, her voice quiet but unyielding. "You need every hand you have. I will not slow you down." He looked at her for a hard second, then gave a sharp nod. "Stay close to me. Do not leave my sight. Is that understood?" "Yes," she said. They moved out into the white. The world disappeared in an instant. The barn, 10 yards away, was a vague shadow. The wind hit them like a solid blow, stealing their breath. The air was not air, it was a blinding, stinging mass of ice particles. Visibility was zero. They rode by feel, following the fence line. The cattle were lowing, a miserable, panicked sound that was ripped away by the wind. They found the first group, huddled and miserable, their backs to the wind. "Push them south," Brody roared, his voice barely audible. "To the canyon." They worked. It was brutal, slow, and terrifying. The horses hated it, fighting the wind, their heads low. Jessie's gelding, the one from the livery, was weak. She could feel it trembling beneath her, its breath coming in short, panicked clouds. They pushed the first bunch into the relative shelter of a low canyon, the wind screaming over their heads. "That is half." Brody yelled to Tom. "We will split! Miguel, Shorty, you take the east flat. Tom, with me. Miss Keller, you stay right behind me." They rode back out into the hell of it. The wind had shifted, and it was now coming in violent, unpredictable gusts that struck like fists. Jessie kept her eyes locked on the dark shape of Brody's coat in front of her. It was her only anchor. They found another group of 20, already drifting. "Turn them!" Brody shouted, riding into them. Jessie moved her horse, trying to get to the side of the herd. The gelding stumbled. The ground was slick with ice she could not see. It recovered, but its panic was rising. A gust, stronger than any before, hit them broadside. It was a solid wall of white. Jessie was blinded. Her horse screamed, a terrified sound, as it slipped on a sheet of ice-covered rock. It went down. Jessie was thrown clear, landing hard on her side. The impact knocked the wind from her. She gasped, the icy air searing her lungs. She heard the horse scramble, its hooves striking rock, and then it was gone. It had bolted, disappearing into the white void. The reins, ripped from her frozen gloves, were gone. "Brody!" she screamed. The wind tore the name from her mouth. It was useless. She was on foot. She was alone. She tried to stand. A sharp, sickening pain shot up her left leg. She cried out, falling back. Her ankle. She had landed on it, twisted it. It would not hold her weight. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. She was going to die here. She was 10 feet from the trail, and she would freeze to death. Invisible. She thought of Gavin, of the long road from St. Louis, only to die here, like this, alone in the snow. "Brody!" she yelled again, desperation in her voice. No one answered. There was only the howl of the wind. She began to crawl, dragging her useless leg. She had no idea which way she was facing. The world was white, above, below, and all around. The cold was a living thing, seeping through her clothes, turning her skin to wood. Her hand hit something small and trembling. She wiped the ice from her eyes. It was a calf, a newborn, separated from its mother, its fur caked in ice. It was shaking in violent, dying tremors. The sight of it, something more helpless than herself, cut through her panic. She pulled herself closer. The calf lowed, a weak, pitiful sound. It was blind in the storm, turning in circles. Cattle drifted with the wind. That was what Tom had said. They would pile up in the gulch. The gulch. She must be near the edge of it. She had to turn the calf. She had to turn against the wind, back toward the shelter. She put her body against the small animal. Pushing, it fought her, wanting to follow the wind. "No," she gritted, the words freezing on her lips. "This way." She remembered Brody's words. Stay with me. She had failed, but she would not fail this small, stupid creature. She unwrapped the torn shawl from her neck. It was stiff with ice. She tried to wrap it around the calf's head, to cover its eyes, but it was too awkward, too frozen. She looked at her own thin coat. It was her only real protection. She did not hesitate. Her fingers were numb, clumsy, but she unbuttoned it. The wind hit her chest like a physical blow, stealing all her warmth. She pulled the coat off and threw it over the calf's head, wrapping it around its face, blinding it. The calf stopped fighting. It stood, trembling, blinded by the coat. Jessie got behind it, pushing, screaming, "Move, move!" She pushed it one step, then another. She was crawling, dragging her ankle, pushing the calf into the wind. She found another calf, huddled against a low rock, and then another. They smelled their companion, sensed the movement, and began to follow. A miserable, tiny herd. She used her last bit of strength to guide them. Her hands, now bare, raw and bleeding. Brody Yates was frantic. He had turned, and she was gone. Just gone. The white had swallowed her. "Jessie!" he roared, pulling his horse around. "Boss, we cannot stop the herd," Tom yelled, his face a mask of ice. "To hell with the herd," Brody yelled back. "Go get them to the canyon. I am finding her." He rode back, into the teeth of the wind. He was riding blind, his heart a cold stone in his chest. He had brought her out here. He had told her she would be safe. His fault. He crisscrossed the ground, his eyes straining. Nothing, just the white wall. "Jessie." He was riding toward the gulch, a sick dread filling him. If she had fallen. He saw it, a flash of color, snagged on a branch of sagebrush poking through the snow. He leaped from his horse. It was her shawl, the torn, wool shawl. It had been ripped from her, but it was a sign, a trail. He looked down, and he saw the tracks, already filling with snow, a dragging mark, footprints, and something else. He followed them, his horse behind him. 20 yards, 30. He found her. She was huddled against a rock outcropping, her back to the wind. She was on her knees, her body curved around 3 small calves. She was wearing only her thin wool dress. Her coat was wrapped around the head of the smallest calf. She was shaking, her eyes closed, her skin a terrible, waxy blue. "Jessie!" He was beside her, his voice rough with terror and relief. She looked up. Her eyes were dull. The calves. I could not let them drift. To hell with the calves, he said, his voice breaking. He tore his own heavy coat from his body and wrapped it around her, pulling her against him. She was light, so light. He lifted her. She cried out when her ankle moved. I have got you, he said. I have got you. He swung up onto his horse, pulling her in front of him, seating her on the saddle. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her back against his chest. His coat enveloped her. He was her shield now. Hold on, he ordered, and turned the horse, pushing it back toward the ranch. The ride back was a blur of white pain for Jessie. She was fading, the cold settling deep in her bones. But she was not cold on her back. Brody's body was a furnace behind her, blocking the wind, holding her steady. She leaned into him, all her pride, all her fear, gone. She just held on. He got her back to the kitchen. Tom and the others were already there, their faces grim. But they looked at Brody, at the woman in his arms, and their expressions changed. He did not set her down. He carried her straight to the hearth, placing her in his own father's chair by the fire. She was shivering so hard her teeth were chattering. Tom, rub her hands, Brody ordered, his voice sharp. Shorty, hot broth, now. He knelt. Her left boot was caked in ice. He did not try to pull it off. He took his knife from his belt. This will hurt, he said, and slit the leather from ankle to calf, peeling it away from her swollen, bruised skin. Her ankle was a mess, already purple and twice its normal size. It is a bad sprain, he said, his touch surprisingly gentle as he probed the bone. Maybe a break, but it is not death. He spent the next hour tending to her. He wrapped her in dry, warm blankets. He forced hot, salty broth between her lips. He soaked cloths in water as hot as he could stand and wrapped them around her ankle, hissing as the heat touched his own skin. He did not leave her side. He sat in the chair opposite her, watching her, as the storm raged and the fever he had feared began to take hold. She drifted, her mind full of snow and the image of Gavin's face. But every time she surfaced, Brody was there. He was just a dark, solid shape in the firelight, watching her. By the next morning, the blizzard had broken. The world outside was a stunning, deadly white. But the wind had died. Jessie's fever was gone, leaving her weak and aching. Her ankle throbbed with a dull, heavy pain. Brody had moved her, chair and all, to the kitchen table, her leg propped up. She was stirring a pot of oatmeal, unable to stand, but unwilling to be idle. The door opened. It was Tom. The old cowboy stood at the threshold, his hat in his hands. He looked at Jessie, at her pale face and bandaged ankle. He looked at the stove, where coffee was already boiling. Then he looked at Brody, who was checking a rifle at the far end of the table. Tom cleared his throat. The herd. We found most of them, in the canyon, just like you said, boss. He took a step into the room, his eyes on Jessie. That was a fool thing you did, ma'am, riding out, but saving them calves? He rubbed his jaw. That was good work. You are ranch folk now, Miss Keller. You will do. He nodded, a gesture of profound respect, and left. Jessie looked down at the pot. Ranch folk. The words were an embrace. Later, after the men had eaten and gone out to check the fences, Brody sat down across from her. The kitchen was quiet. The only sound the drip of melting ice from the eaves. The thaw had begun. Tom is right, Brody said. You will do. He leaned forward. This arrangement. Jessie, the trial is over. I am not. I cannot let you go. Jessie's heart beat faster. I need you to stay, he said, his voice low and serious. Permanently? But that mark on the gate, the man in town, he is a threat, a real one. I want to go to Judge Wilson. I want him to draw up a contract, a permanent one that gives you legal protection, one that binds you to this ranch, to me. It will be a shield. It will keep you safe from whomever you are running from. He was offering her a fortress. He was offering her his name, backed by the law. She looked at him, at his earnest, tired face. He had saved her life. He had tended to her. He had sat by her chair all night. He had offered her a shield. But she had not crawled through a blizzard and saved 3 calves to be someone's protected ward. She had done it as an equal. "I will stay, Brody," she said, her voice clear. He let out a breath, a tension he had been holding. "Good. But not as a housekeeper," she said. He frowned, confused. "And not as someone who needs a contract just for protection." She met his gaze, her own steady, drawing on a strength she did not know she had. "If I stay as you first said, as a partner, an equal partner. I will run this house. I will manage the books. I will have a say. I am not a servant, and I am not a child to be hidden." Brody Yates stared at her. He saw the woman who had faced him in the yard, the woman who had faced down a blizzard, the woman who had chosen to ride into the storm rather than hide from a man. The gulch had been the edge of her old life. This was the new one. The thaw was not just outside, it was between them. A slow smile spread across his face. It was the first time she had truly seen him smile. "An equal partner," he repeated. He stood up and poured 2 cups of coffee. He placed one in front of her. "All right then, partner. We will tell Judge Wilson to draw up those papers." That night, the ranch was quiet. The wind was still. Jesse was sleeping in the small downstairs bedroom, the one that had been Brody's father's. She could not manage the loft ladder with her ankle. She was drifting in a warm, safe sleep when a sound pulled her awake. It was a faint scrape, the sound of the front door, the one that led to the porch. She sat up, her heart pounding. The house was dark. The fire in the kitchen banked to embers. She heard it again, a faint thwack, like something small hitting the wood. She held her breath. Silence. She waited. 1 minute, 2. She could not stand it. She eased herself out of the bed, her ankles screaming in protest. She bit her lip, refusing to make a sound. She hopped, balancing on her good foot, to the bedroom door. She peered out. The main room was empty, bathed in the pale, cold moonlight streaming through the front window. And there, on the floor, just inside the threshold, was a sliver of darkness. A piece of paper. It had been pushed under the door. She froze. He had been here, on the porch, while they slept. She hopped to the door, her hands shaking. She bent down, her ankle threatening to buckle, and picked it up. It was a scrap of paper, torn from a ledger. In the moonlight, she could just make out the writing. It was a dark, hurried scrawl. 2 words. "G is coming." The flimsy piece of paper felt as cold as ice in Jesse's hand. G is coming. He had been here. He had stood on the porch, on the other side of this very door, while she slept. The thought made her skin crawl. A violation that left her feeling exposed, hunted. Her ankle throbbed, a sharp counterpoint to the sick beat of her heart. She hopped on her good foot, steadying herself against the wall, and made her way through the dark house to the stairs. The small room downstairs was hers now, but Brody was up in his own. "Brody," she called, her voice a harsh whisper. It was not loud enough. She gripped the railing. "Brody." She heard a heavy thud from above as his feet hit the floor, followed by the sound of him pulling on his trousers. In seconds, he was at the top of the stairs, a dark shape holding a rifle. "What is it? What did you hear?" His voice was low, ready. "He was here," she said, holding up the note. "He was on the porch." Brody was down the stairs in 3 long strides, taking the paper from her. He moved to the window, angling the note to catch the pale moonlight. His face, when he read it, went still. It was not a look of fear. It was a cold, contained fury that was far more frightening. He moved to the front door, his rifle still in his hand. He checked the latch. It was undisturbed. He opened the door a crack, peering out into the moonlit yard. The world was silver and silent. Nothing moved. "He is gone," Brody said, his voice tight. He shut the door and bolted it. "He just wanted you to know. He is playing with you." "Who sent it?" Jessie whispered, leaning against the wall. "The warning." "I do not know," Brody said. "Someone in town must have a conscience. Maybe Martha, maybe Henderson. It does not matter. It means Doyle is not just asking questions anymore. He is making his move. He will come tomorrow." He looked at her, his face set in the dim light. "We can leave, right now. I have a line cabin up in the high country, north of here. It is stocked for winter. He would never find us. We can take the best horses and be gone in an hour." It was a tempting offer. Safety, escape, an end to this. Just running, disappearing into the white, vast wilderness. Jessie shook her head. Her wrapped ankle ached, a reminder of what she had already survived. "No?" Brody looked at her, surprised. "I have been running since Missouri," she said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. "I ran from him. I hid in your loft. I rode into that storm because I was more afraid of him than I was of freezing. I am so tired of being afraid." She pushed herself upright, away from the wall. "You offered me a partnership. Brody, you offered me a shield. A name. If this partnership means anything, we do not fight him in the mountains. We fight him here, in Creekside, with the law, the way I should have from the start." Brody was silent for a long moment, watching her. He saw the woman who had collapsed at his gate, but he also saw the one who had saved his calves. He saw the terror that still lived in her eyes, but he saw the new, hard resolve that held it at bay. He gave a single, sharp nod. "You are right. He wants to use the law. We will meet him with it. Judge Wilson." He looked toward the window. The moon was already low. "We ride at first light." The morning ride to Creekside was tense. Brody had hitched the wagon, making a bed of blankets in the back for Jessie so she could prop up her injured ankle. She sat beside him on the bench instead, her foot resting on a grain sack, her spine rigid. She would not ride like an invalid. As they neared the town, the air itself felt different, in the clear, cold light of day. Creekside was not the friendly, curious place she had visited with Brody before. It was watchful. Mr. Henderson was sweeping the porch of his mercantile, but he stopped when he saw the Diamond Y wagon, his face tight. He gave a short, hesitant nod, then quickly went back inside. Men standing outside the saloon stopped talking, their eyes following the wagon. Gavin had been busy. The poison had already spread. They pulled up in front of the small building that served as both the sheriff's office and Judge Wilson's chambers. The street was quiet, but it was the quiet of a held breath. A man in a flashy vest and a city hat was leaning against the hitching rail. He watched them with lazy, assessing eyes. The tout. And then another man stepped out of the sheriff's office. He was new. Someone Jessie had not seen before. He wore a deputy's badge, pinned crookedly to his coat. Before Brody could even help Jessie down, a third man emerged, this time from the saloon, wiping his mouth with a linen handkerchief. Gavin Doyle. He was handsome, in the way a prized but vicious show horse is handsome. His hair was dark, his coat was expensive city wool, and his face was flushed with whiskey and confidence. He smiled when he saw Jessie. It was a smile of pure, arrogant ownership. "Well, Jessie, my dear girl," he said, his voice carrying across the street, rich and smooth. "You have certainly led me on a merry chase, all this way, and you have found yourself a protector." Brody stepped down from the wagon, his movements deliberate. He planted himself on the ground, a solid wall between Jessie and the man who hunted her. "She is not your dear," Brody said, his voice flat. "And you will not call her that." Gavin's smile widened. "This is a family matter. Friend, a private dispute. You would do best to step aside. This is the Diamond Y Ranch, Brody said, his voice like cold steel. That makes it my business. She is on my land and under my roof. The new deputy stepped forward, his hand resting near his pistol. That would be Mr. Yates. I take it I am Deputy Stroud. I have a warrant here, properly issued from the Circuit Court in St. Louis, Missouri. It is for the arrest of one Jessie Keller on charges of embezzlement and theft from her family estate. The accusation, spoken loud and clear in the middle of the street, hit Jessie like a physical blow. Embezzlement, theft, heads were appearing in windows. It is a terrible business, Gavin said, pitching his voice to the watching windows. She took her poor, grieving mother's inheritance, cleaned out the estate, and fled. Left me to settle her debts. And now I find her. His eyes slid from Brody to Jessie, his expression a perfect mask of false pity and dirty insinuation. I find her here, living with this man, unchaperoned, ruined. I am afraid. It truly breaks my heart. He was stripping her of her honor, piece by piece, in front of the whole town. Jessie's face was white, her hands clenched so tightly her nails bit into her palms. You will watch your mouth, Brody said, his voice a low growl. He took a step toward Gavin. Or what, cowboy, the deputy sneered, moving to stand with Gavin. This is official business. I am here to extradite the prisoner. You will do no such thing. The voice cut through the tension like a razor. Judge Wilson stood on the boardwalk in front of his office. He wore his long black coat, his white mustache bristling. Judge, Gavin said, tipping his hat, his charm turning on like a spigot. We were just handling the paperwork. A simple matter. There is nothing simple about it, Mr. Doyle, the judge said, his cold eyes sweeping over Gavin, the deputy, and the warrant in his hand. I am the magistrate of this county. That piece of paper from Missouri has no authority here until I have reviewed it, and I do not conduct my reviews on the street. Deputy Stroud, if you are indeed a sworn officer, you will know that. The deputy looked flustered. Sir, it is a valid warrant. It is an accusation, Judge Wilson corrected him. I see a citizen of this county, Mr. Yates, and a woman who has been in his charge. I hear you, Mr. Doyle, making claims. I require proof, not saloon gossip, and not a warrant I have not yet seen. We will have a temporary hearing on this matter. A hearing, Gavin protested. That is not necessary. I have the papers. I will be the judge of what is necessary, Wilson snapped. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, we will use the church, as it is the largest room and this seems to have become a public spectacle. You will present your proof, and Mistress Keller will be given the opportunity to answer your claims. Is that clear? Gavin's face tightened, the charming mask slipping. Perfectly, but the prisoner. She is not a prisoner. She is a resident. The judge said, until this hearing, Miss Keller remains in the custody and care of Mr. Yates. Any attempt to interfere with her, by you or by your deputy, will be seen as contempt of my court. Good day, gentlemen. Judge Wilson turned on his heel and disappeared back into his office, the door shutting with a solid, final click. Gavin Doyle stared at the closed door. His smile was gone. He turned his venomous gaze on Brody. You are just delaying the inevitable. Cowboy, the law is on my side. She is mine. Brody ignored him. He turned and gently helped Jessie down from the wagon, lifting her as if she weighed nothing, setting her carefully on her good foot. We will see what the law says, Brody said, his back to Gavin. They had to wait, but they also had to work. Brody, half carried, half walked Jessie to Henderson's Mercantile. They needed allies. Mr. Henderson was wringing his hands, his face pale. Brody, this is bad business. That deputy, Stroud, he rode in yesterday with Doyle. He is not our county sheriff. He is from Cheyenne. Bought and paid for, if you ask me. Are you standing with us, Henderson? Brody asked, his voice low. I do not want trouble, the man stammered. Embezzlement, and her reputation. People are talking. Let them talk, a sharp voice said from the back. Mistress Henderson came forward, her face set. That girl pays her bills, and she looks me in the eye when she does it. That is more than I can say for that slick creature Doyle. The mercantile bell jingled. Martha bustled in, her face red with indignation. I heard it, that pig, standing in the street spreading filth. Judge Wilson is a good man. He will see the truth. He needs proof. Martha, Jessie said, her voice strained. She was shaking. It is my word against his, and he has a warrant. What proof do you have? Jessie, Brody asked, steering her to a stool by the counter. This was the moment. Jessie reached deep into the bodice of her dress and pulled out the small, folded packet of papers she had carried against her skin for 1,000 miles. My mother's will, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Brody took it, his rough fingers unfolding it with care. It was simple, handwritten on plain paper. I, Eleanor Keller, being of sound mind, do leave all my personal property, including the contents of my savings, to my daughter, Jessie Keller, to be hers alone, free of any claim from her stepfather, Gavin Doyle. This is it, Brody breathed. This is clear. But look, Jessie said, pointing with a trembling finger. The corner, it is torn. He did that. The night I ran, he grabbed it from me, and it tore. He said it was just a piece of paper, that it was invalid without the full signature block. Brody examined the tear. A small triangle was missing from the bottom right corner, taking part of the witness signature with it. Who witnessed it? Her pastor, Jessie said, the hope in her chest collapsing. Reverend Whitaker. He was a friend of hers. He knew what Gavin was, but he is not in St. Louis. He was sick. He left for his health to move west, to Colorado. I do not know where he is. A dead end. The will was just paper without the witness to swear to it. Gavin's proof, forged or not, would look official. Theirs was a torn, handwritten note. They spent the rest of the day in a desperate, quiet search. Brody went to the telegraph office. The stage line. No one by the name of Whitaker had bought a ticket to Colorado. They were defeated. As dusk began to settle, painting the dusty street in shades of purple, they stood by the wagon, ready to go back to the ranch. They would have to face the hearing with nothing. He will win, Jessie said, her voice flat. He will take me back. I will not let him, Brody said, his voice a low, fierce growl. You cannot shoot him, Brody, she whispered. This is the law. This is what I wanted, and I have no proof. Just as Brody was about to help her into the wagon, a small boy ran up, breathless. Mr. Yates. He pushed a folded note into Brody's hand and ran off before Brody could even speak. Brody opened it. It was Martha's handwriting. The name Whitaker. I remembered. The new circuit preacher. The one who took services last Sunday. He is filling in at Sweetwater. He came through Creekside last week. His name is Reverend James Whitaker. Sweetwater. Brody looked up. The sun was gone. That is a 6-hour ride, one way. Jessie's heart, which had leaped with hope, sank again. I cannot ride, she said, looking down at her ankle. And you will never make it back by 10 in the morning. I will, Brody said. He lifted her into the wagon. I will. He drove her back to the ranch, the horses at a fast, jarring trot. The night was cold and clear. Tom was waiting on the porch, his rifle cradled, watching the road. Tom, you are on guard. No one gets near her, Brody ordered. He did not go into the house. He went straight to the barn and emerged minutes later, leading his best horse, a lean bay mare built for speed. Jessie was waiting on the porch, her hands gripping the railing. Brody, It is too dangerous to ride that hard in the dark. He stopped in front of the porch, looking up at her. The moonlight turned her face pale, her eyes large and dark with fear. He will not take you, he said. I will be back by 10, with the preacher. Please, she whispered. Be careful. He stepped up onto the porch, so he was standing right in front of her. He was so close she could feel the cold night air coming off his coat, see the grim determination in his eyes. He did not say anything else. He reached for her. It was not a gentle or hesitant touch. It was a sudden, desperate claiming. He pulled her to him, his arms wrapping around her like steel bands, one hand spreading wide across her back, the other cradling the back of her head, pulling her face tight against his chest. He held her, his body a solid, warm shield. Jessie gasped, a small, broken sound, and then she sagged against him. Her own arms came up, wrapping around his waist, her hands clutching the thick canvas of his coat. She buried her face in his shoulder, breathing in the scent of him. Leather and cold air and absolute safety. I will be here, she whispered into his coat. I will be waiting. I will be back, he said again, his voice rough against her hair. We will go through this, together. He held her for one more long, hard second. It was a promise, a vow. Then he let her go, stepping back, and she felt the cold rush in to fill the space where he had been. He swung up onto the mare. He did not look back. He kicked the horse into a gallop, and the sound of his departure was a rapid, fading drumbeat, swallowed by the immense, dark silence of the prairie. The longest night of Jessie Keller's life passed in silence. She sat in the dark kitchen, her bound ankle propped on a stool, and listened. She listened for the sound of a horse at a gallop. She listened for the scrape of a boot on the porch. She heard only the faint whisper of the night wind and the slow, heavy tick of the mantel clock. Tom sat on the porch, a silent shadow with a rifle across his knees. He did not move. At dawn, he came in. He is not back, Jessie said, her voice flat, devoid of hope. It is a long ride, ma'am, Tom said, his voice a low rumble. He will be there. Mr. Brody. He does not break his word. It is time to go. Tom hitched the wagon. He helped her onto the high seat, his touch surprisingly gentle. We will face them, he said. The church was full. It was cold, the air smelling of old wood, wax, and the damp wool of coats. Every bench was packed. Jessie saw Martha in the front row, her face set like stone, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The Hendersons were near the back, looking pale. A cluster of men from the saloon, including the tout she had seen with Gavin, stood by the door, watching with greedy eyes. Judge Wilson sat at a simple table set before the altar. He was the law, and this was his courtroom. Gavin Doyle and the man named Stroud, the deputy, stood to one side. Gavin was immaculate, his city coat brushed, his face smooth and confident. He smiled at Jessie, a small, knowing smirk. Tom carried a simple wooden chair to the front for Jessie and helped her settle, her injured foot propped on a stack of hymn books. She sat alone at her table. The clock on the church wall ticked, the sound echoing in the silence. It was 5 minutes past 10, then 10 minutes past 10. Brody was not here. Judge Wilson looked at the door, then at Jessie. His face was stern. Miss Keller, we cannot wait all day. This is a legal proceeding. I know, sir, she whispered, her hands clenched. He will be here. Gavin laughed, a low, pleasant sound that made Jessie's skin crawl. Your protector seems to have abandoned you, my dear. A wise choice. Perhaps he knows a losing fight when he sees one. He turned to the judge, his voice becoming formal, serious. Judge Wilson, this is, as I said, a simple matter. I am here to retrieve a fugitive. I have the papers. Proceed, Mr. Doyle. The judge said, his voice flat. Gavin stepped forward, holding a sheaf of papers with a flourish. My stepdaughter, Jessie, fled St. Louis immediately following her mother's death. She did so after embezzling a significant sum of money, a sum meant to pay my late wife's debts. I was left to cover them. He produced a single document. This is a promissory note, an IOU for $500, a loan I made to her in good faith, which she signed just 3 weeks ago. She promised to repay me from the estate. Instead, she vanished with the money, and with this debt unpaid. The warrant from Missouri is for her retrieval. He handed the note to Judge Wilson. Her signature is plain. She is a thief. Deputy Stroud stepped forward, his hand on his belt. And Judge, as for her character, we have all heard the talk. She has been living, unchaperoned, at the Diamond Y Ranch. She has no reputation left to defend. A low, ugly murmur went through the crowd. This was the poison. He was branding her a thief and a whore. Judge Wilson held up the IOU, studying it in the thin morning light. A loan, you say, made in St. Louis 3 weeks ago. Yes, sir, just before she fled, Gavin said smoothly. The judge looked up, his sharp eyes scanning the room. Is Mr. Tom, foreman of the Diamond Y, present? Tom, who had been standing like a statue by the door, stepped forward. Here, Judge. Mr. Tom, you have worked for the Yates family for how long? Nigh on 20 years, sir. Tom said, You are aware of the comings and goings at the ranch. I am. Then tell this court, when, precisely, did Miss Keller arrive at the Diamond Y? Tom did not hesitate. She arrived a month ago, sir, near Froze, on a spent horse. She has not left the ranch since, save for one trip to Henderson's, and the day of the blizzard. Gavin's face tightened. That is a lie, she... Silence. Mr. Doyle, the judge commanded. He looked at the IOU in his hand, then back at Tom. So, you testify, under oath, that Miss Keller was here in Wyoming a full month ago. Yes, sir, I do. Then I find it remarkable, the judge said, his voice dangerously quiet, that she was able to sign this note in St. Louis, Missouri. Only 3 weeks ago, she would have to ride faster than the telegraph. Gavin's face darkened. It is a clerical error, a mistake in the date. I am sure, the judge said. You also present this warrant. I see a stamp, but I do not see the official seal of the St. Louis Circuit Court. This looks more like a bill of sale, Mr. Doyle, than a legal instrument. It is legal, Stroud blustered. The heavy church door opened with a groan. Every head in the room turned. Brody Yates stood in the doorway. He was not the clean, contained rancher they knew. He was caked in mud from head to foot. His face was gray with exhaustion. His coat was torn at the shoulder, and he was leaning heavily against the doorframe. But he was here. And he was not alone. He was supporting a small, older man in a dusty black coat and a preacher's collar. My apologies, Judge, Brody said, his voice a raw rasp. My horse threw a shoe near Sweetwater. We had to ride the last 3 miles. He helped the older man forward. Jessie's heart, which had been a cold, dead weight, hammered against her ribs. She gripped the table, tears blurring her vision. He had made it. Gavin Doyle stared at the preacher. The confident smirk vanished. He looked, for the first time, like a cornered wolf. And who is this? The judge asked, his voice sharp. Judge Wilson, Brody said, helping the man to a chair. This is the Reverend James Whitaker. For 20 years, he was the pastor of the church attended by Mistress Eleanor Keller, Jessie's mother. Reverend, the judge said, his voice softening. You have had a hard ride. I came as soon as Mr. Yates found me, the Reverend said, his voice thin but clear, cutting through the silence. I came because I feared this day would come. I knew Eleanor's heart, and I knew Gavin Doyle. He turned his steady, tired eyes on Gavin. "I knew you to be a man of profound dishonesty, a gambler and a bully. Eleanor, God rest her, knew it too. She was terrified you would steal her daughter's rightful inheritance." "This is slander," Gavin shouted, his voice cracking. "A lie." "Is it, sir?" the Reverend asked. He reached inside his own worn coat and produced a folded piece of paper. Eleanor was a clever woman. She feared one copy of her will might not be safe. She had me as her pastor and friend. Transcribe a second copy with my own hand. She signed it, and I witnessed it. I have kept it as my sacred duty. He handed the paper to Judge Wilson. Jessie, her hands shaking so hard she could barely move, fumbled in the bodice of her dress. She pulled out her own worn, folded document. "Sir," she said, her voice trembling, "this is my copy, the one he tore, the night I left." The judge laid the two documents side by side on the table. The room was so quiet, the hiss of the wax candles was audible. "Mr. Doyle," the judge said, his voice like ice, "your forged note is dated 3 weeks ago. This will, witnessed by Reverend Whitaker, is dated 3 months ago. It states, and I quote, 'All my personal property, including the contents of my savings, to my daughter, Jessie Keller, to be hers alone, free of any claim from her stepfather, Gavin Doyle.'" Judge Wilson picked up Jessie's torn will. He held it against the Reverend's copy. "And the tear," the judge said, his voice rising with quiet, cold triumph. "The torn corner on Miss Keller's document. It fits perfectly against the witness signature block on the copy held by Reverend Whitaker." He held them up together. The torn piece from Jessie's document and the main body of the Reverend's fit like a key in a lock. It was absolute, irrefutable proof. "This," Judge Wilson declared, "is the truth, and your claims, sir, are a fraud." Gavin Doyle did not move. His face was a mask of pure, murderous hatred. "Deputy Stroud," the judge said, turning his cold gaze on the deputy, "you brought these false claims to my county. You used a fraudulent warrant to intimidate a citizen. You have allied yourself with this forger." I was just following orders from Cheyenne," Stroud stammered, his face pale and sweating. "I will be sending a long message to the magistrate in Cheyenne about officers for hire," the judge said. "As for you, Mr. Doyle, this court finds you have committed fraud, perjury, and conspiracy to extort. You have slandered the name of Miss Keller. You have—" "Wait." Every person in the church looked at Jessie. She was standing, her knuckles white on the table, supporting her own weight. "Judge," she said, her voice clear and strong, ringing through the small building. I do not want him arrested. Not here." Gavin stared at her, his expression a mixture of confusion and contempt. "He is a manipulator, sir," Jessie said, her voice steady, though she was shaking. "If you arrest him here, he will be out of your jail in a week. He will find a new angle. He will follow me. He will always follow me. I do not want revenge." She paused, gathering her strength. "I want it to be over." Judge Wilson looked at her, his stern face softening with a profound respect. "What, then, do you ask of this court, Miss Keller?" "I want my honor back," Jessie said, lifting her chin. "I want my name cleared, publicly, in front of this town, and I want a legal order, a binding order of protection, that he is never to come within 100 miles of me, or of the Diamond Y Ranch. Ever again, I want the law to be a fence. Sir, a fence that holds." She had not chosen vengeance. She had chosen justice. She had chosen peace. Judge Wilson looked at her for a long moment. "A wise and just request. This court is honored to grant it." He banged a heavy Bible on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "This hearing is concluded. The claims against Miss Jessie Keller are dismissed, with prejudice." All documents presented by Gavin Doyle are found to be fraudulent. An order of protection is hereby issued, effective immediately, barring him from this county. Deputy Stroud, you will escort Mr. Doyle to the county line. If he is seen here again, he will be arrested on sight. This court is adjourned." Gavin's face was terrible to see, but the law, the town, and the truth were all aligned against him. Stroud, desperate to save his own skin, grabbed his arm. "Let's go, Doyle! It is over!" He was marched out of the church, a defeated, furious man. The room was silent, and then, from the front row, Martha began to clap. Mr. Henderson joined in. Suddenly, the old church bell, the one reserved for weddings and holidays, began to ring, slow and steady. Tom was at the back, pulling the rope. It was a peal of victory, a public declaration. The gossip was dead. Jessie's honor was restored. Brody and Tom helped her back to the wagon. The entire town seemed to be on the street, smiling, calling out, "Well done, Miss Jessie. Good on you, Brody. You brought him back." Brody said nothing. He just lifted her onto the wagon seat as if she weighed no more than a child. He looked utterly exhausted, his body swaying, but his eyes, when they met hers, were bright. The ride back to the Diamond Y was quiet. The sun was high and warm. The snow was melting fast now, the sound of dripping water everywhere. The world felt scrubbed clean. They sat side by side on the hard wooden bench. Jessie was still trembling, the adrenaline and the relief washing through her in waves. It was over. It was finally, truly, over. As the ranch gate came into view, the gate that had once terrified her, Brody shifted on the seat. His gaze was fixed on the road ahead. He reached over. He did not say a word. He just took her hand. His hand was rough, calloused, and unbelievably warm. It closed around hers, completely enveloping it. It was not the desperate, claiming grip of the night before. It was not the hurried, accidental touch in the kitchen. It was a quiet, steady, and public possession. Jessie looked down at their joined hands, the wall between them, the formal arrangement, the carefully drawn lines of Mr. Yates and Miss Keller. All of it dissolved, like the snow melting on the high plains. She curled her fingers, lacing them with his. He squeezed her hand, a simple, solid pressure. And for the first time in her life, Jessie Keller felt completely and perfectly safe. The ranch yard was quiet when they returned. Tom was waiting, his face unreadable as he watched Brody lift Jessie from the wagon. The old cowboy's eyes drifted for a half-second to their hands, which were still clasped. He looked away, a flicker of something soft in his hard gaze. "Heard the bell from here," Tom said, his voice a low rumble as he took the horse's reins. "Figured you had handled it." "We handled it," Brody said. He was swaying on his feet, the ride to Sweetwater and back having drained his last reserve of strength. She is done, Tom." "Good," the old man said. He nodded once at Jessie, a new respect in his eyes. "Good to have you home, ma'am, boss." He led the wagon away, leaving them alone on the porch. The house was quiet. The terror had left it. The air, which had been thick with fear and unspoken words, was now clear, but it was not empty. It was filled with a new, heavy silence, the silence of what came next. "You need to sleep," Jessie said, her voice soft. She let go of his hand and hopped on her good foot to the kitchen chair, her ankle a dull, throbbing reminder of the storm. "You have not slept in 2 days." Brody nodded, his body moving stiffly. He did not go upstairs. He walked to the fireplace, added a log from the bin, and sat heavily in his father's large chair. He did not even take off his muddy, torn coat. He was asleep in moments, his head falling back against the worn leather, the lines of exhaustion carved deep around his mouth. Jessie sat in the kitchen, watching him. The sun, high and bright, poured through the window, striking the man who had ridden through the dark for her. She had seen him as a boss, a shield, a man of honor. Now, in this vulnerable, exhausted sleep, she saw something else. She saw just Brody. She made coffee, her movements slow, hopping from the stove to the counter. She did not need to be quiet. He was in a sleep too deep for noise. She sat and drank her own cup, just watching him, her heart filled with a profound, aching tenderness. He had not just cleared her name. He had given her a life. He had held her on the porch, and it had been a promise of together. Now, she had to understand what together meant. He woke in the late afternoon. The light in the kitchen had turned from bright white to a warm, amber gold. He woke with a start, disoriented, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle that was not there. "You are safe," Jessie said from her chair. She had a bowl of broth waiting for him on the table. "It is all over." He scrubbed his face with his hands, his gaze clearing. He looked at her bandaged ankle, at her pale, steady face. "Yes," he said. He stood, his joints stiff. He shed the ruined coat, tossing it over a peg. He drank the broth, standing, in 3 long swallows. The silence returned, but now it was awake. "My ankle is feeling better," she said, just to break it. "Good," he said. He moved to the window, looking out at the rapidly melting snow, the world emerging, new and wet, from its white prison. "There is a place," he said, his back still to her. "Past the corrals. I want to show it to you, if you feel you can walk." "Walk?" She looked down at her foot. "It is not far," he said, turning. "And I will help you. The air is warm." He was asking, not telling. She nodded. "All right." He came to her, and she stood, taking her weight on her good foot. He did not just offer an arm. He put his arm fully around her waist, pulling her securely against his side. "Lean on me," he said. She put her arm over his shoulders. They moved as one, her hopping gait supported entirely by his strength. They left the house, the scene of her trial and her fear, and walked past the barn, past the smell of hay and leather. They went beyond the fences, following a small game trail that led down into a dip in the land. As they cleared the rise, Jessie gasped. It was a small, secret valley, while the high plains were still a stark landscape of gray grass and brown mud. This place was alive. It was sheltered from the wind. The sun had melted all the snow, revealing a carpet of new, impossibly green grass. A stream, swollen with snowmelt, ran through the middle of it, the water clear and loud, sparkling in the low sun. And along the banks, pushing up through the damp earth, were the first wildflowers, small, brave dabs of blue and yellow. "Oh, Brody," she whispered. He helped her to a wide, flat log, bleached white by the sun. "I call it Eden's Corner," he said, his voice low. "It is where the spring always shows up first." They sat, side by side, not touching. The air was soft, filled with the sound of running water and the clean smell of wet earth. "My father," Brody began, his voice rough. "He left me this ranch. He left me the cattle, the brand, the debts. But he did not leave me a home. This house, it was just a building. It was cold. Even before he passed, it was cold." He looked at her, his gray eyes serious, the exhaustion still clinging to him. "The day you came, Jessie, you were half dead. You were terrified of me. But you stood in my yard, and you did not beg. And then, you went into that kitchen. You built a fire." He reached over and took her hand. His was still ingrained with mud from his ride. "You brought the heartbeat back to the diamond. Why? I had forgotten what this place was supposed to sound like. I did not realize how dead it was, until I heard you working, until I smelled bread baking." He looked down at their joined hands. "That arrangement I proposed, the partner part, it was the truth. But it was not the whole truth. Jesse's heart began to beat, a slow, heavy drum. I told myself it was for your honor, he continued, his words slow, as if he were pulling them one by one from deep inside. To protect you from gossip, to give you a shield against Doyle. And it was, but it was for me, too. He turned to her, his gaze holding hers. I have watched you every day. I watched you face down the hands. I watched you ride into that blizzard. I watched you save my calves when you were dying yourself. I told you that you would be safe with me, but the truth is, I feel stronger with you here. His voice dropped to a near whisper. I have loved you for weeks. Jesse, I held it back. It did not seem... It was not honorable. You were trapped. You depended on me for food, for safety. To speak then, it would have been a kind of power. Another man owning you. I could not be him. Oh, Brody, she breathed, her own hand tightening on his. But today, he said, a new strength in his voice. Today, in that church, you were not the girl who came to my gate. You were not a stray. You were magnificent. You stood on your own. You faced him down. You set your own terms. You are free, Jesse. And you are safe. And now I can finally say it. Jessie felt the tears, which she had held back all day, finally well in her eyes. When I came here, she said, her voice thick, I was just a ghost. I was just trying to survive the next hour. I was afraid of everything. I was so afraid of you. When you said wife, I thought it was the same trap, just with a kinder face. I know, he said, his voice full of pain. But you were not a trap, she said, looking up at him, the tears running freely now. You were a shelter. You gave me work. You respected my space. You rode all night. You never once made me feel small. You made me feel visible. She took a shaky breath, swiping at her cheeks. You have given me a home, Brody, a real one, a place where I am not looking over my shoulder, and I have been thinking what I would do. Now that I am safe, I had this dream. I want to teach the children on the other ranches, Tom's grandchildren, the Henderson's boy. They cannot read. I thought I could start a small school, right here, in the house, reading and ranching. I can do that because of you. You have given me a place where I can dream again. She looked at him, her eyes shining. My fear, it is not all gone, but when I am with you, it is quiet. You have made me brave. Brody's face, so often a hard mask of duty, was transformed by a look of profound tenderness. He reached into the small pocket of his vest. He did not pull out a fancy velvet box. He pulled out a small, simple ring. Jesse Keller, he said, his voice hoarse. That arrangement is not enough, not for me. I do not just want a partner for the books or the house. I want a partner for all of it. For the hard winters, for the spring, for all the days to come. He held out the ring. It was not a diamond. It was a single, luminous pearl, set in a plain gold band. It was my mother's, he said. She told me a pearl is like a rancher's life. It starts as a piece of grit, an irritation, a hardship. But if you have patience, and you protect it, over time, it becomes something beautiful. He looked her in the eye. I am asking you, Jesse, properly, this time, not as a shield, not as an arrangement. I am asking you to build a family with me, as my equal, as my partner, as my wife. Will you marry me? She was crying, but she was smiling. Yes, she whispered. Oh, yes, Brody, yes. His hands were shaking as he took her left hand and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He just looked at her, his eyes full of a love so deep and steady it took her breath away. Jesse, he breathed. This time, she was the one who moved. She put her hands on his rough, exhausted face. She leaned in. The kiss was not a fire. It was a thaw. It was the end of the long, cold winter. It was the relief of a storm past, the comfort of a fire in the hearth. It was the taste of salt from her tears and the feel of safety. It was a promise, made and sealed, in the quiet of their own small Eden. She rested her forehead against his. "This place," she said, looking at the new green grass. "It is a place to start." "Our start," he said, his arms closing around her, holding her. "I have a new rule for our partnership," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. He pulled back just enough to see her face. "What is it?" "The heavy work," she said, putting her hand over his heart. "We share it, and all the big decisions, we sign them together." "Agreed." His slow, rare smile spread across his face. Reaching his eyes, "Agreed, partner." "I do not need a servant," he said, the old words now a benediction. "You need a wife," she finished, her voice strong and clear as the stream beside them. He kissed her again, gently, and they sat for a long time, holding each other, while the sun set and the breeze in their hidden valley blew soft and warm. The news of the engagement, the real one, spread through Creekside with the speed of a spring thaw. It was Martha who heard it first, when she came out to the ranch to help and saw the pearl ring on Jesse's finger. She had cried, her kind face breaking into 1,000 wrinkles of joy, and hugged Jesse so tightly her ribs ached. Mistress Henderson. Sarah, upon hearing the news, declared that a wedding required a new dress, and donated a bolt of fine blue wool, the color of the sky just before sunset. She had said. The wedding was set for 2 weeks later. It was to be simple, in the small church that had been the site of Jesse's trial. Now, it would be the site of her testimony. The building itself seemed to be breathing a sigh of relief, its dark corners ready to be filled with light. Tom, Miguel, and Shorty, after a long, awkward silence, had presented Brody with a set of newly shod horses. When they saw Jesse, Tom had ducked his head, turning his hat in his hands. "Ma'am," he had rumbled, we are pleased to keep you. We have taken the liberty of cutting some birch for the church, if that is all right." Jessie, her ankle now healed to a dull ache, had walked over and placed her hand on the old man's rough sleeve. "It is more than all right. Tom, it is perfect." The day was clear and bright. The church was full, not with the silence of judgment, but with the warm hum of community. Reverend Whitaker, his face glowing, stood at the altar. Brody stood beside him. He was not wearing his ranch clothes. He wore a new black suit, his face scrubbed, his hair slicked back. He looked unbearably handsome and profoundly nervous. And then Jesse walked in, on Mr. Henderson's arm. The blue dress, simple and perfectly cut, was a startling splash of color. She wore no veil, only the pearl ring on her finger. When Brody saw her, his nervousness vanished, replaced by a look of such stark, unguarded love that Jesse's breath caught. They stood before the altar. Reverend Whitaker spoke of hardship, of storms, and of the profound grace of finding shelter. Then came the vows. Brody took her hands. His were steady. "Jesse," he said, his voice clear, ringing in the small space. "I promise to be your partner, to be your shield, to honor your word, for the house and for the ranch. I will stand with you, shoulder to shoulder, all of our days." Jessie's voice, when she spoke, did not tremble. It was full. "Brody," she said, her eyes locked on his. "You found me when I was lost. You gave me a home. I promise to build that home with you, to share the labor, and to share the joy, shoulder to shoulder, all of our days." When he kissed her, the small church erupted. Martha was weeping openly. Tom was clapping, a slow, thunderous sound. The bell, the same bell that had rung for her victory, now rang for her wedding. It was the sound of her belonging. They walked out into the bright Wyoming sun, not as owner and housekeeper, not as rescuer and victim, but as Mr. and Mistress Yates, partners. Life settled into a new rhythm, one of shared purpose. The honeymoon was the simple act of returning to the ranch. Their life was not a poem. It was a daily, practical love. Brody no longer let her rise first. He was the one who woke in the dark, his movements quiet, and built the fire in the kitchen stove. So the chill was off the room when she came down. They would have coffee together in the pre-dawn quiet, talking in low voices about the day ahead. What fences needed mending, what supplies were low, which mare was due to foal. He would ride out, and she would begin her day. The house was her domain. She ran the books, managed the supplies, and cooked the food that fueled the ranch. But the work was no longer a desperate bid for survival. It was an act of contribution. In the afternoons, the partnership took on a new shape. She had kept her word. In the corner of the large living room, the one with the big window, Brody had built a long, smooth table of pine. At 1 o'clock, the children would arrive. Tom's 2 grandchildren, who lived on a small homestead a mile north, and the Henderson's son, who rode out from town. The sound of children's voices now filled the ranch house. Jessie stood at the front of the room, a piece of slate in her hand, on the wall behind her. She had hung a carefully drawn alphabet chart. The children sat, their faces serious, struggling to form their letters. It was a strange, beautiful sight. The letters A, B, and C, stark and clear, hung on the wall just feet away from a saddle Brody was in the process of restitching, its leather smelling of oil and horse. It was the symbol of their life education and labor, reading and ranching, bound together. One afternoon, as Jessie was guiding a small hand to form the letter G, Brody came in, stamping the dust from his boots. He did not interrupt. He stood at the back of the room, his hat in his hands, and just watched. He watched his wife, her face alight with patience, teaching a child to read. He felt a swell of pride so fierce it almost hurt. When the lessons were done and the children had gone, he came forward, putting his arms around her waist from behind, pulling her back against his chest. "You are a wonder, Jessie Yates," he murmured into her hair. She leaned back against him, her hands covering his. "We are building something, Brody," she said. The last shadow of her past vanished a week later. Brody rode back from Creekside with the mail. He handed her a letter. It was from Judge Wilson. Her hands shook as she opened it. It was not a summons. It was a note. "Mistress Yates," it began, "I thought you would wish to know. I have received confirmation from the U.S. Marshal in Cheyenne. Gavin Doyle has left the territory. He was last seen boarding an eastbound train in Nebraska. The restraining order has been filed in all surrounding states. He will not be returning." She read it twice. She did not feel triumph. She did not feel anger. She felt quiet. A final door had closed. A deep, heavy lock had turned. She showed Brody. He read it, his face hard. Then he folded it and handed it back to her. He did not say a word. He just gently touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she had not realized she had shed. That night, Jessie took the small, torn piece of her mother's will from her dress. She no longer needed to carry it. She walked to the kitchen stove, opened the firebox, and laid it on the glowing coals. She watched it curl, blacken, and turn to ash. The last piece of her old life was gone. Spring came on in a rush of green. The cattle were fat, and the snowmelt had turned the creeks high. It was calving season. It was the ranch's payday, a time of endless work and high anxiety. They were all working, from sunup to sundown. One night, a hard, cold rain was lashing the ranch. Brody came in, soaked and exhausted. "It is the new heifer," he said, his face grim as he accepted a cup of coffee from her. "The red one. She is in trouble. She has been in labor for hours." "Tom?" Jessie asked. "He is up in the north pasture. A different cow. A breach. I am on my own, and I think the calf is stuck. Badly." He was already heading to the door, grabbing his lariat and a long knife. "What is the knife for?" Jessie asked, her stomach cold. "If I cannot pull it, I will have to cut it out. To save the mother." His voice was heavy. He hated this part. "Wait," Jessie said. She grabbed her own heavy coat. "I am coming with you." "Jessie, this is no place for you. It is ugly." "I am not a guest." "Brody," she said, pulling on her boots. "I am your partner. You might need my hands." He looked at her, then nodded. "All right, but stay clear." The barn was loud, the wind rattling the roof. The heifer was in a large birthing stall, her sides heaving, her eyes wide with pain and terror. Brody examined her, his movements gentle but efficient. He swore, low and deep. "It is bad. It is a shoulder presentation. It is completely wedged." He set his jaw. He looked at the knife. "No," Jessie said, her voice sharp. Brody looked at her, shocked. "Jessie, I have to. The cow will die." "Let me try," she said. "Try what you do not know." "I do," she said, her voice full of a sudden, unshakable authority. She was already rolling up her sleeves, her face set. "At the stables, back in St. Louis. We had a mare like this. I watched the old groom. I know what he did." She turned to him, her eyes fierce. "This is not his ranch. It is our ranch. That is our calf. I will not let it die without trying." He stared at her. This was not the woman he had married. This was a force of nature. "What do you need?" he said, his voice quiet. "Hot water, soap, and I need you to hold her head. Hold her steady. Brody, no matter what." He did. He held the suffering animal, his voice murmuring to it. Jessie scrubbed her arms to the elbow, her face pale but determined. She spoke to the cow, her voice low and soothing. Then she took a deep breath and plunged her arm, shoulder deep, into the heifer. The animal screamed and fought, but Brody held her fast. "Easy, easy, girl. I have got you." "I feel it." Jessie gritted, her eyes closed in concentration, her face slick with sweat and rain. "The leg, it is folded back. I cannot get a grip." "Jessie, let it go," Brody said, his voice tight. "You are hurting yourself." "No," she snapped. "Hold her." She pushed, her whole body straining. She was smaller than a man, her arm thinner. She could reach places he could not. She found the folded leg. She grasped the tiny, slick hoof. She began to pull, to turn the calf inside its mother. "It is turning. I think it is turning. Yes, I have it." She pulled her arm out and collapsed against the stall, breathing hard. "Now, Brody. Now, the ropes." He moved, tying the lariat to the calf's visible front feet. "Pull with me," he ordered. They pulled together, in time with the heifer's contractions. It was a brutal, desperate fight. And then, with a great, wet rush, the calf was born. It slid onto the hay, a slick, unmoving heap. "It is not breathing," Brody said, his voice dead. "Move," Jessie commanded. She was already on her knees. She grabbed a handful of hay and began rubbing the calf, hard, clearing its mouth, blowing into its nose. Come on, breathe. You breathe." The small heap of red fur gave a sudden, shuddering gasp. It coughed, it shook its head. The mother, hearing it, gave a low, exhausted moo and began to lick her baby. Jessie sat back on her heels, covered in mud and birth fluid, her body shaking with exhaustion. Brody said nothing. He just dropped the rope, walked over to her, and pulled her to her feet. He held her, his arms like steel, just holding her, his face buried in her wet hair. "It is all right," she whispered, her arms going around his waist. "It is all right. We did it." An hour later, they were back in the kitchen. It was 3 a.m. The rain had stopped. The heifer and her new calf were safe. They were sitting at the table, sharing a pot of coffee. They were both still damp, still streaked with mud, and too tired to even wash. Brody reached across the table, his hand covering hers. He did not say, "I love you." He did not need to. "You are a hell of a partner, Jesse Yates," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "So are you," she said, her smile watery. The house was quiet, the fire in the stove a low, warm hum. The next week, Brody and the hands began hauling timber from the hills. They were not building a fence. They were building a new room, a separate, small building near Eden's Corner, with a wide front porch and a big window. 2 weeks later, Jesse stood in front of it. It smelled of fresh-cut pine. Brody was nailing a sign over the door. It was a simple carved piece of wood. It read, "Reading and Ranching, the Diamond Y School." The ranch was not just safe. It was not just warm. It was, finally, full of life. The seasons turned. The harsh white of the first blizzard gave way to the deep, promising green of Eden's Corner, which ripened into the high gold of summer grass, which in turn faded back to the brittle gray of autumn. The rhythm of the ranch was the rhythm of the land. 4 years passed. The wind still blew across the high plains, but it no longer felt like an enemy. It was just the sound of home. It was late afternoon, the sun a low amber disk that cast long shadows across the ranch yard. The light was the color of honey, thick and warm. Jesse Yates stood on the wide front porch of the ranch house, leaning against the sturdy pine post that Brody had replaced the previous summer. She was not the gaunt, haunted girl who had first stood in this yard. The prairie sun and a life of good food and hard, fulfilling work had put color in her cheeks, and a quiet, unshakable confidence in her bearing. Her hair was still tied back in a practical knot, but the lines of fear that had once bracketed her eyes had been replaced by the faint, soft lines of laughter. She wore a simple calico dress and a flour-dusted apron, and she looked entirely like she belonged. A clatter of small, heavy boots on the porch boards made her smile. A boy, perhaps 3 years old, with Brody's steady gray eyes and a shock of dark, unruly hair, ran past her, chasing his sister. She was a year older, quick and wiry, with Jesse's determined chin. "Matthew, you cannot catch me," the girl shrieked with laughter. Her name was Eleanor. Ellie, after the mother Jesse had lost. "Can too, Ellie," the boy shouted, his voice full of joyful effort. They tumbled off the porch into the clean, soft dust of the yard, rolling in a tangle of arms and legs, their laughter bright and sharp in the quiet afternoon. Jessie watched them, her heart so full it felt as if it might break. She often found herself pausing in these quiet moments, marveling at the sheer, improbable weight of her happiness. She remembered the girl she had been, clutching a torn wool shawl, exhausted, her voice trembling as she asked for work. She had expected nothing but rejection, or worse, a different kind of servitude. She had knocked on the gate of the Diamond Y asking for a job, a place to hide, and the man inside, a man as harsh and guarded as the land he worked, had said the words that changed everything. "I do not need a servant. I need a wife." She had misunderstood him. Of course, she had heard a proposition. When he was offering a partnership, that phrase had become the foundation of their lives. It was not a romantic slogan, not a line from a dime novel. It was a daily practice. Partner, not servant, meant Brody still rose first, in the deep cold of the dark, to light the fire in the kitchen stove, because he knew the chill troubled her. It meant Jessie managed the ledgers, her clear, fine handwriting now detailing profit and loss, not just lists of flour and beans, It meant she had a full vote on whether they sold the cattle in Cheyenne or waited for the buyers to come south, and her sharp mind for numbers had saved them more than once. It meant when the heavy, bloody work of calving season came, she worked beside him, her hands as capable as his, saving the animals they both depended on. It meant, in the evenings, he would read the Cheyenne newspaper aloud to her while she mended, and she, in turn, would read to him from a book of poetry she had ordered from St. Louis. Their lives were woven together, thread by thread, a fabric strong enough to withstand anything. The legacy of that partnership was not just in the healthy cattle or the warm, full house. It was just beyond the rise, near Eden's Corner. The small log building, the schoolhouse, was silent now. The lessons done for the day, reading and ranching, it had become the heart of the community. 3 afternoons a week, 8 children from 3 different ranches, including her own Ellie, rode in. They sat at the long pine table Brody had built, and they learned their alphabet and their numbers. They learned about history from Jesse's books, and they learned about the land from Brody, who often stopped by to show them a hawk's feather or explain how to read a brand. They were raising a generation of children who knew both labor and literacy. Children who understood that kindness was a form of strength, and that a person's worth was not in their station, but in their character. This was Jessie's great work. She had come west seeking only safety, and she had found a purpose. She was not just a survivor, she was a builder. The justice she had sought had been quiet, but it was absolute. The law had held. Judge Wilson, now retired, often came to the ranch for Sunday dinner. He never spoke of Gavin Doyle. No one did. The man was a ghost, a bad dream that had faded with the morning. The restraining order, the fence she had asked for, had been enough. She had not needed revenge. She had needed peace, and she had found it. The shadow that had chased her across a continent had no place here. In the bright, open sun of her new life, happiness was not something that fell from the sky. It was built, piece by piece, like a stone wall, with calloused hands and a courageous heart. A horse's hooves sounded in the yard. Brody was riding in from the west pasture, his silhouette dark against the setting sun. He was the same man, tall and steady, but he rode differently now. He was not the solitary, grieving rancher. He rode like a man who knew a warm supper and a loving family were waiting for him. He saw her on the porch and raised a hand. She raised hers in return. Ellie and Matthew scrambled up from the dust, running to him. "Papa, Papa!" He swung down from the saddle, a fluid, strong movement, and scooped up his son, settling the boy on his hip. He put his other hand on his daughter's head, his rough fingers gentle in her hair. He walked toward the porch, the children flanking him, his spurs making a small, familiar jingling sound. He stopped at the bottom step, looking up at his wife. His gray eyes were full of the same steady, quiet love she had seen in Eden's Corner 4 years ago. "Jessie," he said. It was a greeting, a prayer, and a statement of fact, all in one. "Brody," she smiled. "You are just in time. Supper is ready." He came up the steps, and they stood for a moment as a family, the 4 of them, bathed in the amber light. Jessie looked out past the yard, toward the main road. The gate to the Diamond Y still stood there. It was the same heavy timber, the same burned brand, but it was no longer a barrier, a test of her endurance. It was a welcome. Ellie, in a fit of spring enthusiasm, had planted wildflower seeds at its base, and a shock of stubborn blue and yellow blooms had taken root, climbing the harsh wood. The gate that had once seemed so forbidding was now a sign of life. The future was not a settled, finished thing. It was as open as the Wyoming sky. There would be new seasons, new blizzards. There would be new calves to save, new students to teach, new dangers, and new joys. The stream in Eden's Corner would continue to flow, but it did not matter. Whatever came, they would face it, shoulder to shoulder, Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to our channel, Wild West Tales, and like this video. It would also mean the world to us if you hit that hype button, so this story can be heard by even more people.